Everyone knows cops and the Mafia are supposed to be enemies. Police are meant to stop criminals, not work alongside them. But in certain departments, that line disappeared completely. Some officers took mob money, carried out killings, and protected criminals while still wearing the uniform. In this video, we break down 10 dirty cops who betrayed their badge for the Mafia. Section 1. Luis Eppolito. Luis Eppolito was born into a Gambino crime family household in Brooklyn in 1948. His father was a soldier known on the street as Fat the Gangster. His uncle ran a crew as a Gambino capo. When Luis applied to join the NYPD in 1969, none of that appeared on his application. The department accepted him, and over the following 2 decades, he earned commendations and built a reputation as an aggressive detective in some of Brooklyn's toughest precincts. That reputation made him valuable to the wrong people. Leuci underboss Anthony Casso did not want occasional tips from a compromised cop. He wanted a permanent line into NYPD intelligence. By 1986, Eppolito and his partner Stephen Caracappa were on a monthly retainer of $4,000 each, arranged through a middleman named Bert Kaplan, who relayed between the 2 detectives and Casso. From that point forward, Casso had what he privately called his crystal ball. The detectives ran names through police databases, identified witnesses cooperating with federal investigators, and fed Casso specific details about wiretap operations and the timing of impending arrests. When a Lucchese figure was under investigation, Eppolito and Caracappa could tell Casso exactly what the department had developed and how close investigators were getting. Problems had surfaced before the arrangement was even formalized. In 1984, FBI agents raiding the New Jersey home of heroin trafficker Rosario Gambino found photocopied NYPD intelligence files bearing Eppolito's fingerprints. He had signed those documents out of his precinct weeks earlier. The department suspended him without pay. A court cleared him in 1985, and he was reinstated and then promoted. Killing was built into the arrangement from the start. Casso paid far above the monthly rate for specific murders, including $65,000 for the staged traffic stop killing of Gambino capo Edward Lino in 1990. One operation produced a catastrophic error. The detectives located a man named Nicholas Guido through nicked records and passed his address to Casso's crew, who shot him dead on Christmas Day 1986. He was the wrong person. A different Nicholas Guido was the target. Retiring from the NYPD in 1990, Eppolito relocated to Las Vegas and briefly tried acting. He wrote a memoir presenting himself as an honest officer from a criminal family, played a mob associate called Fat Andy in Goodfellas, and unsuccessfully tried his hand at Hollywood screenwriting. He and Caracappa purchased homes on neighboring streets in Nevada and lived there openly for over a decade. Agents arrested both men outside an Italian restaurant near the Las Vegas Strip on the evening of March 9, 2005. A loaded handgun was found in Eppolito's waistband. A federal jury convicted him in April 2006 on 8 counts of murder and racketeering. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 100 years and died inside a federal facility in Tucson in November 2019. Eppolito spent over a decade murdering for the Lucchese family while earning police commendations in the same building. His partner operated from inside the department's intelligence infrastructure, and what he built there was in some ways more dangerous. Section 2. Stephen Caracappa. Stephen Caracappa joined the NYPD the same year as Eppolito, 1969, and took an entirely different path through the department. While Eppolito worked the streets of Brooklyn, Caracappa moved into intelligence and eventually helped build the Organized Crime Homicide Unit, the squad specifically created to investigate mob killings. He became, in the view of his superiors, one of the most knowledgeable detectives in the city on the internal workings of the 5 families. Where Eppolito was loud and physically imposing, Caracappa was known by colleagues as the Stick, thin, quiet, and methodical. A former supervisor who had run the department's organized crime task force told reporters in 2005 that he had long suspected both men and had personally blocked Caracappa from joining his squad years earlier. Caracappa joined the unit anyway, after that supervisor retired. Over the years of their arrangement with Casso, Caracappa's access was specific and deliberate. He ran database searches on individuals the Lucchese family wanted located, passed information through Kaplan to Casso, and used his position inside the unit tracking mob murders to shield the very organization generating those murders. In at least one case, An address he produced led to an abduction, a torture session, and a killing. Throughout 1987, the two detectives identified two men as suspected cooperators inside a burglary crew that federal prosecutors were investigating. One of them, John Heidel, was murdered in October of that year. His mother, Betty Heidel, spent nearly 2 decades attempting to convince investigators that two NIP detectives had arranged her son's death. She was largely ignored until a Brooklyn cold case investigator named Tommy Dades revisited the matter in the early 2000s. After Casso was arrested in New Jersey in 1993 and began cooperating, he named both detectives. Federal prosecutors considered him too volatile a witness for other ongoing cases and shelved the matter. Kaplan's eventual cooperation in 2005, combined with Dades' work and Betty Heidel's persistence, finally brought the case forward. Burt Kaplan's testimony at the 2006 trial laid out the arrangement in specific detail: the meetings, the monthly payments, the murder assignments, and the results. His account was corroborated by records, timelines, and testimony from mob figures who had witnessed parts of the arrangement firsthand. The prosecution's case did not rest on Kaplan alone. Caracappa was convicted in April 2006 on all charges, including 8 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 80 years and ordered to pay more than $4 million in fines. New York City later settled civil lawsuits brought by victims' families for a combined $18.4 million. Caracappa died inside a federal medical facility in North Carolina on April 8, 2017. Caracappa built and then weaponized the unit designed to protect New York from the mob. The next case belongs to a city 2 hours south, where a police officer went further than either of them and eventually rose to a full position inside the crime family he was supposed to oppose. Section 3. Ron Previte. Before Ron Previte ever sat across from a crime boss, he had already spent years turning his badge into a personal enrichment tool. Previte joined the Philadelphia Police Department after leaving the Air Force, and within a short time he was shaking down traffic violators for cash, extorting pimps, stripping parts from impounded vehicles, and stealing from crime scenes. He later described his time in the Philadelphia PD as where he truly learned to become a criminal. Within his first years on the force, the corruption had embedded itself into routine. He collected regular payments from bookmakers and vice operators in his patrol area, protected those who paid and pressured those who did not, and operated with the kind of comfort that comes when a corrupt officer believes everyone around him is doing the same thing. When internal affairs attention intensified around 1979, the department forced him to resign amid mounting corruption allegations. Forced out of law enforcement, Previte did not step back from crime. He took a security job at the Tropicana Casino and Resort in Atlantic City and began stealing from there almost immediately, taking cash, chips, and bar supplies, and running card games and prostitution rings out of unused suites. Arrested for theft in 1985, he negotiated his way out by agreeing to cooperate with New Jersey State Police, an agreement that went nowhere and changed nothing in his behavior. Rather than retreat, Previte moved further into the Philadelphia crime family's orbit. By the early 1990s, he had been formally inducted as a member and rose to the rank of capo. He ran gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and drug operations across South Jersey. He described himself to anyone who asked as a general practitioner of crime and drew a personal line at murder, though not for moral reasons. His stated logic was that a dead debtor cannot pay. Standing over 6 feet tall and close to 300 pounds for much of his adult life, Previte was physically dominant in every room he occupied. In 1997, facing mounting federal pressure, he made a different calculation. He agreed to wear a recording device for the FBI and spent more than a year gathering evidence against the Philadelphia mob's leadership. Wearing a hidden wire through hundreds of conversations, Previte recorded meetings with mob boss Ralph Natali and acting boss Joseph Merlino, known as Skinny Joey. Natali's recordings placed him directly inside drug distribution discussions and led to a guilty plea. Evidence gathered against Merlino and his associates helped build a racketeering case that went to trial in 2001. Previte testified in open court, admitting a 30-year criminal career in explicit detail. Ron Previte's cooperation helped convict or implicate more than 50 mob associates and brought down 3 successive bosses of the Philadelphia crime family. He declined the witness protection program and returned to South Jersey, where he lived until he died of a heart attack on August 21, 2017, at age 73. Previte wore 2 badges for decades and eventually sold the second one to the government. The next case involves a more recent corruption, one that played out in the suburbs of Long Island and ended in a federal courtroom in 2025. Section 4. Hector Rosario. By the 2010s, both the Bonanno and Genovese crime families had extended gambling operations into Nassau and into Queens, running joker poker machines and card games from the back rooms of coffee shops, social clubs, and at least one shoe repair store. Nassau County Police Detective Hector Rosario was there to protect the Bonanno side of that business. Starting at some point around 2013, Rosario accepted payments from Bonanno family members in exchange for law enforcement intelligence. Prosecutors at his 2025 trial put the monthly rate at $1,500. In exchange, he looked up the home address of a potential government witness, tipped off a Bonanno associate who was under active investigation, and took steps to disrupt the Genovese family's competing gambling operations on Long Island. One source of tension between the two families was the collapse of a profit-sharing arrangement over a gambling den inside a gelato shop in Queens. When that fell apart, both families began encroaching on each other's suburban operations. The Bonannos brought Rosario in to apply pressure on Genovese-run locations, and his method was to stage police raids that were not real. Rosario's first staged raid, at a shoe repair shop in Merrick operating a backroom gambling den, did not go as intended. Gamblers inside recognized the operation as a fake almost immediately. A Genovese associate present described it in court as unprofessional and visibly unconvincing. One gambler, known to others in the room as Mario the Landscaper, announced to those around him that what they were watching was not an actual police action. Rosario and the men with him broke one gaming machine, yelled that it was the police, and left without making a single arrest. Prosecutors told the jury that Rosario had sold himself to the Bonanno family, taking their money, running their intelligence, and performing interference work while carrying a detective's badge. When the FBI interviewed him in January 2020 about Bonanno and Genovese activity in the suburbs, he denied any knowledge of either family or their gambling operations. Investigators later established he had made more than 30 false statements in that single interview. Indicted in August 2022, Rosario was fired from the Nassau County Police Department that same week. His trial opened in Brooklyn Federal Court in February 2025. A jury convicted him following 7 days of testimony, finding him guilty of making false statements to federal investigators. He was acquitted on the top obstruction of justice charge. United States Attorney John Durham described Rosario as a corrupt detective who chose loyalty to an organized crime family over the public he was sworn to protect, and noted that when officers exploit their positions for personal gain, it erodes public trust in law enforcement broadly. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Rosario's conviction showed that mob corruption of law enforcement is not a closed chapter from the 1980s. The next case opened that same chapter inside an entirely different institution, where an FBI agent assigned to bring down a crime family may have been sending information the other direction instead. Section 5. Lindley DeVecchio. During the early 1980s, Roy Lindley DeVecchio was the FBI's senior New York agent assigned to the Colombo crime family, one of the 5 families, and at that time, a family under severe internal tension. His primary duty was to develop intelligence on the family's leadership and to manage informant relationships. The most significant of those relationships was with Gregory Scarpa Sr., a Colombo capo who had been an FBI informant since the 1960s and was known within organized crime circles as the Grim Reaper. Gregory Scarpa had been recruited by the Bureau under unusual circumstances years earlier and was reportedly used by the FBI in 1964 to extract information from a Ku Klux Klan member in Mississippi about the murders of 3 civil rights workers. After a period of dormancy, DeVecchio brought him back as a regular source around 1980. Over the following decade, the Bureau paid Scarpa approximately $158,000 for information about the Colombo family's activities. According to federal prosecutors who later charged DeVecchio, and to testimony from Scarpa's longtime companion Linda Shiro, the relationship between the two men had long since reversed direction. Rather than the Bureau directing Scarpa, Scarpa had reportedly flipped the dynamic. He allegedly gave DeVecchio cash, liquor, and other gifts. In return, DeVecchio allegedly passed him the names of family members cooperating with investigators, warned him about surveillance operations, and flagged the impending arrest of Scarpa's son on drug charges. Each of those alleged disclosures had consequences inside the family. During the Third Colombo War, which ran from 1991 to 1993 and left roughly a dozen people dead, prosecutors alleged that intelligence DeVecchio provided allowed Scarpa to identify and eliminate rivals and suspected informants. 4 killings were specifically named in the 2006 indictment. Among the victims was the daughter of a former senior Colombo figure. Another was a Colombo soldier who had become a born-again Christian and was viewed by leadership as a potential cooperator. Brooklyn District Attorney Charles Hines indicted DeVecchio on 4 counts of second-degree murder in 2006. The trial opened in 2007. The prosecution's primary witness was Shiro, who testified that she had regularly sat in on meetings between DeVecchio and Scarpa, during which DeVecchio passed along names and operational intelligence. The case collapsed mid-trial when a 1997 newspaper article surfaced showing that Shiro had told a reporter a significantly different version of events, linking DeVecchio to only one of the 4 cited killings, rather than all 4. Evidence developed from sources other than Shiro had proven insufficient to independently corroborate the central allegations. Prosecutors requested dismissal of all charges, and the judge granted it. DeVecchio was never convicted of any crime in connection with his relationship with Scarpa. No conviction of any kind followed, but the case left a documented record. A federal judge overseeing a separate Colombo-related proceeding stated plainly, in a 2012 court transcript, that in his view, DeVecchio had provided information to Scarpa that got people killed, and found it outrageous that nothing had happened to him as a result. DeVecchio's charges were dropped mid-trial, and he was never convicted, but a judge's documented assessment of what the evidence showed did not disappear with them. In Illinois, a police chief had spent nearly a decade operating with no ambiguity at all, because Sam Giancana had placed him on the force himself. Section 6. Michael Corbett. Sam Giancana ran the Chicago outfit through most of the 1960s, controlling gambling, loan sharking, and political influence across the city and its suburbs. He maintained relationships with politicians, judges, and law enforcement officials in the towns where the outfit operated its most profitable businesses. In the suburb of Willow Springs, southwest of Chicago, the outfit ran prostitution houses, card rooms, and casinos without any meaningful interference. Keeping it that way required a cooperative police department, and Giancana solved that problem directly. Michael Corbett came to Giancana's attention as a teenager in the Chicago suburbs, running security on outfit-controlled slot machine routes and demonstrating the reliability that organized crime values in a long-term associate. Giancana personally arranged for Corbett to join the Willow Springs police force in his early 20s. From his first day on the job, the arrangement was understood on both sides. He was there to protect outfit business. Rising through the department over the following years, Corbett became police chief in 1973 and held that position until 1982. During that period, he collected a standard police salary and a substantially larger income from the outfit. He worked as a bagman, carrying bribe payments from mob enterprises to politicians and fixers, including regular deliveries to a First Ward political operator named Pat Marcy, who served as the outfit's primary channel to Chicago city government. He also allowed Willow Springs to function as a location where the outfit could quietly dispose of unwanted things, including, on at least one occasion, a body, carrying bribe money across the city, and protecting outfit venues from outside interference were the operational core of his service to the mob for nearly a decade. He conducted surveillance on behalf of mob figures, arranged intimidation of individuals who threatened outfit operations, and ensured that local law enforcement in Willow Springs did nothing the outfit had not first approved. His police authority made all of it considerably easier. Across his career in law enforcement, Corbett worked directly with several outfit figures beyond Giancana, including a powerful loan shark and crew boss named Sal Bastone. Federal investigators began building a case against him in the mid-1980s. The central charge involved his role in the 1982 murder of a woman named Diane Masters, the wife of a mob-connected Chicago attorney. Corbett's contribution was to help dispose of her body by sinking her car in a canal outside Chicago. He was indicted in 1987 and convicted of racketeering and conspiracy to commit murder. Federal sentencing placed him at 20 years in prison. He served approximately a decade before being released in 1998. Upon release, Corbett broke the code of silence he had maintained through his trial and cooperated with investigators. He also wrote a memoir called Double Deal, co-authored with the nephew of Sam Giancana, the man who had put him on the police force 4 decades earlier. The book detailed how the outfit maintained control of suburban police departments and how bribe money moved at every level of the system. Released from prison in 1998, Corbett lived another 6 years before dying in Tampa, Florida, on July 27, 2004, at age 60. Corbett was placed inside a police department by the mob before he had even applied. The next Chicago case involved a cop who made that choice for himself, hiding his origins to get hired, and serving the outfit from inside the department for 2 decades. Section 7. Anthony Doyle. Anthony Doyle was born Anthony Passafume on Chicago's South Side and changed his surname before applying to the Chicago Police Department. The force was heavily Irish in its hiring culture at that time, and an Italian name was, by his own later admission, a practical obstacle. As Doyle, he was accepted. He went on to serve for 21 years carrying a Chicago police badge while secretly functioning as a messenger, loan collection enforcer, and intelligence source for the outfit's 26th Street crew, operating under one of the family's most violent figures, Frank Calabrese Sr. What prosecutors would later call his double life had begun before he ever put on a uniform. As a young man in the South Side neighborhoods around 26th Street, Doyle was already collecting juice loan payments on behalf of Calabrese's crew, installment payments with heavy interest owed to mob loan sharks. He continued this work throughout his police career, using his badge to add a layer of protection to himself and those he was serving. Nicknamed Twan by the people around him, Doyle was described by the prosecution in the 2007 Operation Family Secrets trial as a sleeper agent, someone embedded so thoroughly in legitimate institutional life that no external signal identified him as anything other than what his uniform said he was. His value to the outfit was institutional access, police databases, information about ongoing investigations, and the kind of credibility that came from carrying a real badge. Making regular trips to a federal prison in Michigan became part of his routine after Frank Calabrese Sr. was convicted in 1997 and sent there to serve his sentence. Doyle visited Calabrese inside the facility and passed police intelligence across the visiting room table to a man already serving federal time for violent racketeering. Prosecutors established that this continued for years after Calabrese's conviction, with Doyle maintaining the service arrangement long past any plausible professional justification. He appeared in court in 2007 alongside some of the outfit's most prominent figures, including acting boss James Marcello, consigliere Joseph Lombardo, known as Joey the Clown, and Calabrese Sr. himself. All 5 defendants in the Operation Family Secrets trial were convicted of racketeering. The evidence against them included the testimony of Calabrese's own son, Frank Jr., who had spent years recording conversations with his father while wearing a wire for the FBI. The 2009 sentencing placed Doyle before U.S. District Judge James Zagel, who rejected both his characterization of the crimes as a lapse in judgment and his request for release on probation. The assistant U.S. attorney handling the case told the court plainly that Doyle was a disgrace. Zagel sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. Unlike the other Operation Family Secrets defendants, Doyle was not held legally responsible for any of the 18 murders investigated in the case. His crimes were treated as those of an associate and enabler rather than a direct participant in killing. That distinction mattered legally, but did not change the nature of what he had done for 2 decades while carrying a city badge. Doyle worked as an outfit asset from inside a Chicago police uniform for 21 years without being identified. The next case sits 1 rank higher, involving the man who had been Chicago's chief of detectives and ran a mob-connected theft ring across 7 states for more than a decade. Section 8. William Hanhart. 33 years into a celebrated career, William Hanhart was one of the most connected law enforcement officials in the city of Chicago. He had risen from patrol officer in 1953 to deputy superintendent and chief of detectives, overseeing some of the department's most sensitive investigative work. National news organizations used him as a source. FBI agents cultivated him as a professional contact. Hollywood director Michael Mann, a Chicago native, hired him repeatedly as a technical consultant on projects including the films Thief and Heat and the television series Crime Story. His reputation as an elite detective was close to unimpeachable by the time he retired in 1986. Hanhart's theft operation had already started before his retirement. While still on the force, he used his access to law enforcement databases to identify traveling jewelry salesmen as targets for robbery. His method was built on patience and police intelligence. Months before major jewelry trade shows, his crew would gain access to hotels, duplicate keys to safety deposit boxes where salesmen stored their inventory, and gather detailed information on specific targets' schedules, vehicles, and patterns. The surveillance techniques Hanhart brought to the operation were the same ones he had refined over decades of legitimate detective work. His crew included associates with ties to the Chicago outfit. Paul Shiro, who was later convicted in the Operation Family Secrets racketeering trial, was among those connected to the ring. The outfit's involvement was not incidental. The mob had maintained relationships with professional theft operations in Chicago for decades, and Hanhart's police access made him useful to that network, well beyond the jewelry operation itself. Months of preparation preceded each robbery. The crew followed targets to hotel rooms and parked vehicles across multiple states, using disguises, specialized key-cutting equipment, and long-running surveillance. On at least one occasion, Hanhart physically assaulted a victim, pistol-whipping a jewelry salesman in a Wisconsin hotel room before stealing close to $1 million in diamonds and gems from his possession. Roughly 12 years of operations across 7 states produced approximately $40 million in stolen jewelry, none of which was ever recovered. Federal investigators who later prosecuted the case described the operation's level of planning as unlike anything they had previously encountered in that category of crime. The scale and precision of the ring, built and run by a man who had spent decades teaching those exact methods to law enforcement, was not lost on prosecutors. Investigators began developing the case against Hanhart in the mid-1990s and encountered institutional resistance in some parts of law enforcement, given the depth of his professional relationships. He was indicted in 2000. Before his scheduled arraignment in 2001, he attempted suicide. He survived. After a legal dispute over whether the attempt constituted obstruction of justice, he pleaded guilty to racketeering and related charges, and was sentenced to more than 15 years in prison, later reduced to 12 following an appeal. William Hanhart served his sentence and was released to a halfway house in 2011. He died at a hospital in Highland Park, Illinois, on December 30, 2016, at age 88. He remains the highest-ranking Chicago police official ever convicted of a crime. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Hanhart used police intelligence to run a mob-connected theft ring for over a decade from inside the department's most senior investigative role. The next case begins in a different NIPT unit, where corruption had become so normalized that the man who eventually exposed it had been part of it himself. Section 9. Robert Leuci. Robert Leuci joined the NYPD's Special Investigations Unit in the mid-1960s and spent the better part of a decade doing what he later admitted everyone around him was doing. The SIU was the department's elite narcotics squad, given citywide jurisdiction and almost no oversight, built to pursue major drug distributors rather than street-level dealers. By the time Leuci had settled into the unit, it was also running as one of the most thoroughly corrupt squads in the department's history. Officers skimmed cash from arrests, sold seized narcotics back into the supply chain, provided heroin to informants to keep them productive, and ran warrantless wiretaps as standard practice. Leuci participated in all of it. New York's narcotics trade in that period moved heavily through organized crime networks, and the SIU's investigative targets were often the same figures making payments to officers on the side. Somewhere inside the unit, the distinction between building a case against a mob-connected supplier and accepting money from one had quietly dissolved. Leuci described it later as something absorbed into the job over time, not a decision made on any single day. Frank Serpico testified before the Knapp Commission in 1970 about widespread NYPD corruption, and he and his colleague David Dirk privately named Leuci as the one honest detective in the Narcotics Bureau. That belief was wrong. But in 1971, without having been caught in any specific act and without external pressure, Leuci walked into the office of federal prosecutors and offered to work undercover. His initial terms were narrow. He would target mob-connected lawyers, court fixers, and judges corrupting the city's criminal justice system. He was not prepared, at that stage, to go after his own colleagues. Federal prosecutors, including a young Rudy Giuliani, accepted the arrangement and deployed him with a wire for close to 2 years. His access was genuine because his relationships inside those networks were real. Built through years of activity he had been part of himself. He recorded conversations implicating organized crime figures, attorneys, and court officials in bribery, evidence suppression, and narcotics-linked corruption. As the investigation widened, prosecutors pressed him to include his former SIU colleagues. He resisted and then agreed. 52 NIPD officers were eventually indicted on corruption-related charges stemming partly from his cooperation. 2 of his closest former partners died by suicide during the investigation. A third died shortly after. Leuci retired from the NIPD in 1981 and spent years lecturing at universities and the FBI Academy on police ethics and institutional corruption. He died in Rhode Island on October 12, 2015. Leuci spent years inside a unit where the line between law enforcement and organized crime had effectively disappeared. What made that possible was not a single corrupt officer, but a system with no mechanism to catch what was already embedded inside it. Section 10. William Phillips. William Phillips worked the Upper East Side of Manhattan as an NYPD detective through the late 1960s, and by all visible measures he was doing well. He drove a foreign sports car with British plates to the precinct. He owned a private plane. He was earning around $10,000 a year from the city. The gap between his lifestyle and his salary was visible to anyone who looked, and almost nobody looked. Phillips had been taking regular payments from gambling operations with mob connections for years, shaking down bookmakers, prostitution rings, and vice operators across his patrol area as a matter of course. The arrangement was not unique to him. It was endemic across large sections of the NIPD in that period, and the structure that made it function was the one the Knapp Commission was specifically created to expose. When the commission began its work in 1970, it faced a central problem. Frank Serpico, its most prominent source, would not wear a wire. Investigators needed someone inside the corruption who would. Phillips agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity from a bribery charge he was already facing, and he proved effective. Working undercover, he recorded conversations with corrupt officers across multiple precincts and gathered evidence that led directly to the indictment of 30 New York cops. Then the tables turned completely. While Phillips was generating testimony for the commission, prosecutors were simultaneously building a separate case against him for a double murder. On Christmas Eve 1968, a pimp and a prostitute had been shot dead inside a Midtown Manhattan brothel. A third person present was shot and survived. Phillips was eventually charged and convicted of both killings. He maintained from the moment of his arrest that he had been framed by forces inside the NIPD, specifically because his Knapp Commission testimony had exposed and threatened colleagues with deep institutional connections. He spent decades in prison, insisting on his innocence. Lawyers who reviewed the case, including prominent defense attorney Ron Kuby, concluded the evidence against him had serious problems and that the possibility of a frame-up was credible rather than dismissible. The murder conviction was never overturned. Phillips died in prison. His case left behind 2 irreconcilable facts. He was a corrupt officer who took mob-linked money for years, and the prosecution that finally imprisoned him was one he spent the rest of his life calling a setup. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.